Good afternoon to all IEM and UEM family members. So today, Professor Poulami Das Choudhury from the Department of Civil Engineering at the University of Engineering and Management, Jaipur, will be presenting Design Philosophy of Earthquake Resistant Structures. So last year, when I was in Jaipur, we faced a severe earthquake. If you remember, Professor Poulami, suddenly everything started vibrating in the room. So from that time onwards, I take a lot of interest. That was the biggest earthquake I ever faced. So from that time onwards, I take a lot of interest whenever the talk is on earthquake. So yes, it is very, very important to design structures which are earthquake resistant. So I myself will be very interested in your topic, the design philosophy of earthquake resistant structures. You may kindly take over from here. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And this is Poulami Das Choudhury. Am I audible, sir? Am I audible?
You're audible. You're audible.
Okay. This is Poulami Das Choudhury, and I'm from Department of Civil Engineering, UM Jaipur. The topic of discussion of today is Design Philosophy of Earthquake Resistant Structure. Now, this presentation will broadly discuss about how earthquake occurs, how earthquake affects structures, and how should we protect structure from severe damage due to earthquake. Now, let us first of all see this cross-sectional view of interior of the Earth. Now, Earth consists of four major parts. That is the inner core, the outer core, the inner core, the outer core, the mantle, and the crust. The inner core has a radius of around 1216 kilometers, and it is basically solid in nature. Solid in nature, and it consists of heavy metals like nickel and iron. Now, the characteristics of inner core, such as the characteristics of inner core, that is the nature of the inner core is solid because inner core is subjected to extreme temperature and pressure. Like temperature is around estimated to be 2500 degrees centigrade and pressure is estimated to be 4 million atmosphere. The inner core is surrounded by outer core and it has a thickness of around 2270 kilometer. And outer core is comparatively relatively liquid in nature and it consists of liquid iron and nickel. The outer core is surrounded by mantle and it constitutes the 84% of the earth volume. It is generally solid in nature, but it acts as a viscous fluid in geological time. And the last one is the earth crust, which has a thickness of 5 to 70 kilometers, and it consists of light material, that is basalt and granite. Now, as I have mentioned in the last slide, that the inner core has a temperature of 2500 degrees centigrade and pressure is 4 million atmospheric pressure, which is extremely huge if I compare it to the earth crust, because earth crust has 25 degrees centigrade as temperature and 1 atmospheric pressure as 1 atmosphere as pressure. Now, due to this huge gradient of pressure and temperature gives rise to convection flow. Now, the convection flow is generally limited to the mantle of the earth, which is viscous, which is generally viscous in nature. Now, due to this convection flow, there will be circulation of the earth mass. Now, what do we understand by the circulation of the earth mass? If there will be a place where hot molten lava will go up and it will get extracted at the surface, and in some other places the cold rock will get sunk at the bottom and it will get absorbed by the mantle. And this cold rock, it will get melt due to the extreme temperature, and it may come out through some other places on some other day. So So basically, this circulation of earth mass is very much important. It's very much important because it actually responsible for the creation of the earth crust. The mass that absorbed eventually melts, become the part of the mantle, which comes out again from another location some other day. Now, the convection flow, the convection flow of the mantle material causes the earth crust and some portion of the mantle to slide over the hot molten outer core. This is the hot molten outer core. Now, due to the sliding of the earth mass, the phenomena of tectonic plate occurs. Thus, the sliding of the earth mass takes place in pieces, which is called the tectonic plates. Now, Earth has total 7 major tectonic plates. That is the African plate, the Eurasian plate, the Indo-Australian plate, the Antarctic plate, the Pacific plate, the North American plate, the South American plate, and the South American. So this forms the 7 major plate tectonics or tectonic plates over the world. And there are other minor plates like Philippine plate, Arabian plate, Caucasus plate, Nazca plate, etc. Our India is encompassed by the Indo-Australian plate and Eurasian plate at the north. Now, as you can see that this picture is having different small scattered round dots, these scattered red dots. So as you can see that the red dots are concentrated at the plate boundary or the boundary of the plate. These red dots are nothing but the distribution of the earth. The earthquakes are generally limited, or it is very much common around the boundary of the tectonic plates. Now, as I have told you that the circulation of the earth mass is continuous, and due to the circulation of the earth mass, there will be always movement of the plate tectonics. Now, that movement of the plate tectonics, we call it as plate boundary interaction. That means, see, just like over here, these are we call it as convergent boundary or convergent plate boundary interaction when two plates come towards each other to collide. This is called divergent plate boundary, where the two tectonic plates move away from each other. And this is called the transfer plate boundary interaction, where the two plates move side by side along each other but in opposite direction. Now, this is a typical convergent plate boundary formation, convergent plate boundary interaction, which caused the formation of the Himalayan range. Now, see, over million of years, the Indo-Australian plate moved forward and it collided with the Eurasian plate, which gave rise to the Himalayan range, which will be very much clear if I play this video. As you can see, this is happening. This is showing an animated time-lapse video. This is happening over millions of years. The Indo-Australian plate is moving forward and it is colliding with the Eurasian plate. And so since it is colliding with the Eurasian plate, it gave rise to our Great Himalayan Range. This is a typical example of convergent plate boundary interaction. Now, what causes earthquake? Now, due to the continuous circulation of the earth mass, there is a continuous movement of tectonic plates, which we call it as plate boundary interaction. Now, let us take these two tectonic plates. These two tectonic plates are showing transform plate boundary interaction. That means the two plates are moving along each other, but in opposite direction. Now, due to this movement, there will be deformation of the elastic rock material, and there will be development of elastic strain energy. Now, there will be a weak region of the earth crust, which we call it as fault, which after some time, it cannot take more stress, or it doesn't have that much strain. Fault is nothing but a heterogeneity in a homogeneous structure, or you can say it's a zone of weakness. So when the rocks along the weak region in the earth crust reaches their strength, there will be a sudden movement, and that sudden movement will be along the opposite side of the fault. Since if this is the fault, then the movement will be the opposite side of the fault. Now due to this movement, there will be a slippage of the crust. There will be slippage of the crust. Now due to this slippage, there will be large amount of elastic energy that was stored within the elastic rock mass. It will get released. Now this release of large amount of strain energy, it propagates through the earth in the form of seismic waves, which causes violent shaking of the earth, and that is called earthquake. Now this is the reason why around the plate boundary interaction, along the boundary of the plate, we see there are highest frequency, maximum frequency of earthquake. Like this is a fact that the energy released during the 2001 Bhuj earthquake, Bhuj earthquake, is about 400 times more than that was released in 1945 atomic bomb activity on Hiroshima. Now, as I've told you that the large amount of elastic strain energy propagates through the earth in the form of seismic waves. As you can see in the picture, this is the fault rupture. This is the zone. This is the weakness zone. This is the zone of weakness where the strain energy has been released suddenly. Now, this strain energy is being propagated in the form of seismic wave, or we can say in the form of body wave or surface wave, because seismic wave can be divided into body wave and surface wave. The body wave is the wave that propagates through the body of the earth, and the surface wave, it is limited on the surface. Now again, the body wave can be divided into primary wave and secondary wave, whereas the surface wave can be divided into Love waves and Rayleigh waves. Now let us understand what are the characteristics of each kind of seismic waves. First, see, this is a P wave. This is the animation of a P wave. Now you can see that in P wave, the particle motion are in this direction, that is in X direction. And over here, the particle undergo continuous extension and compression. That means push and pull. Okay, compression, pushes and pull, a compression, dilation of the rock material. Now, this compression and dilation of the rock material, it occurs along the direction of the propagation. You can see the direction of the propagation of the wave is in X direction, as well as the particle motion are also in X direction. Now, this is the second part of body wave, that is secondary wave or S wave. Now, this is similar to P wave, but the main difference is that it occurs along vertical plane. Over here also, the particle undergo continuous extension and compression. See, it is undergoing continuous extension and compression, but the particle movement is in Z component direction, that is in vertical direction, whereas the direction of the propagation of the wave is X direction. So the difference between the P wave is that the direction of the propagation and particle motion are parallel to each other, whereas in this case, the direction of the propagation and the particle motion are right angle towards each other, right angle to each other. The next is surface wave. First one is Love waves. Now, Love waves is similar to S wave, but the main, almost similar to S wave, but the main difference is that it travels, the particle movement are in horizontal component. You can see, as you can see the arrow, the particle motion are in horizontal component, that is, it is in Y direction. It doesn't have a vertical component just like the S wave. It is in horizontal component. And just like snake, how snake moves across the ground, just like it is similar to the movement of a snake. So this is the direction of the propagation of the wave, X direction, and this is the particle motion. Next is the surface wave, which is called the Rayleigh waves. Now, in case of Rayleigh waves, the particle undergo rotation. It undergo oscillation in an elliptical path in the vertical plane, and the direction of the propagation are in X direction, and the particle motion are in oscillation. So these are some of the important points on seismic waves. P waves are the fastest, followed in sequence by S wave, love wave, and rally wave. S wave do not travel through liquids, and S wave in association with love wave cause the maximum damage to the structure. Yes, S wave, the combination of S wave, that is the part of a body wave, and love wave, which is the part of a surface wave, causes the maximum damage to the structure. Now, we have discussed how earthquake occurs. Now, how we can record data of an earthquake, how we can record the data, earthquake data. Now, the conventional and the most important instrument that is used for earthquake recording is seismogram, or is called seismograph. Now, nowadays, obviously, we use digital seismograph. I am explaining the mechanism of the analog seismograph over here. Seismograph consists of three components: the sensor, the recorder, and the timer. The sensor consists of the support. As you can see, this is the support, the magnet, and the string attached with the pendulum. We provide the magnet to incorporate the damping so that the pendulum remain in its place, and the support, magnet, and string and pendulum form the sensor. The recorder, this pen that is attached to the pendulum bob, this rotating drum, and the chart paper or the record paper that is attached to the drum, this constitute the record. Now comes the time. The timer is the motor that is rotating the drum at a constant speed. Now, how this works? Like, let us consider the earthquake motion is in this direction, that is the ground shaking is this direction. Now, when the ground will shake in this direction, the pendulum will oscillate in this direction. Now, when the pendulum will oscillate in this direction, the pen that is attached to the pendulum, it will trace the amplitude. It will trace the amplitude of the wave formation of the oscillation over this rotating drum. Now, as I've shown you here, the direction of the ground shaking in X direction. The direction of the ground shaking can also be in the other horizontal component, that is in Y direction. In that case, accordingly, we have to install the seismograph. Now, ground can also shake in vertical direction. Now, in case of recording data or recording vertical shaking data, we have to replace the pendulum by spring. Now, these are some of the pictures of analog seismograph. As you can see, this is the paper, the chart paper, and as you can see over here, the data is taken. As you can see, this is the data. These are two different models of analog seismograph. Now, the data that we have obtained, that is over here, that is recorded over here. The data that we have obtained is represented in the form of either displacement time history or acceleration time history. But before that, I want to say that the data recorded is called the accelerogram. The instrument which is used to measure the earthquake data is called the seismograph, and the data that is obtained, it is called the accelerogram. Now, this is a typical data that is obtained. This is a data that is obtained by the Seismic Observatory by CSIR NIST Jorhat, and they have and this seismic observatory has recorded data due to seismic activity that occurred at Kopili Fault on October 2, 2020. Now, the data that we obtain, it is in displacement time history. Now, what do we understand by displacement time history? That means the displacement, the ground displacement, the graph between, it's the relationship between the ground displacement and time. And since earthquake is a dynamic activity, that's why we will get the variation of displacement, the variation of the ground shaking with over a period of time. Now, that by either by certain numerical analysis or numerical integration, we can convert it into acceleration time history. Now, these are the three different data. These three different data are from the are due to the are due to the same seismic activity, that is Kopili fault. Now the first data, it shows the Z component. Z component means the vertical shaking of the earth. This data, it shows the north-south component. North-south component means the y direction, that is one of the horizontal component of ground shaking, and east-west is another horizontal component direction. You can say the x direction of orthogonal component. Now, as you can see that typically an accelerogram consists of three main parts, that is the foreshock, the main shock, and the aftershock. And you can see that I have pointed the maximum value. That maximum value we will call it as peak ground acceleration. Peak ground acceleration means the maximum acceleration. The maximum acceleration by it is the maximum acceleration that the ground has faced while shaking. This is called peak ground acceleration, and this value is very important because this value is used for further analysis of data or to get any kind of modified result. Now, these are some of the important terminology that is associated with earthquake. That is focus. Focus is the point where earthquake originate. That is, it is the fault line, or this is the point of weak zone where strain energy has been released. Now, epicenter is the point vertically above the surface of the earth, and the distance between the epicenter and the focus is called the focal depth. Now, focal depth is very important parameter because it determines the damaging potential of an earthquake, because it has been seen that earthquakes which have focal depth of 70 kilometer, less than 70 kilometer, is considered very dangerous. And earthquakes, these are also called shallow earthquakes. So damaging earthquakes have a shallow focus with focal depth less than 70 kilometers. Epicentral distance, it's a distance of a point of interest, like this is the epicenter and this is the places of interest. So the distance between this epicenter and the place of interest is called the epicentral distance. Now, magnitude. Now, magnitude is a quantitative measure of the actual size of the earth. It is the quantitative measure. It represents the size of an earth. It is measured by Richter scale, and it is also called local magnitude. There are different other magnitude scales that they are like body wave magnitude, surface wave magnitude, surface wave magnitude, and wave energy magnitude. Now, you see that an increase in magnitude by 1 means that the 31 times higher energy release. So if suppose I'm taking two earthquakes, first earthquake I'm taking is having magnitude 7.7, and another earthquake I'm taking which is having a magnitude of 6.7. Now the earthquake which has a magnitude of 7.7, it will release energy 31 times more than the earthquake which is having a magnitude of 6.7. Now if I consider magnitude of earthquake 5.7, then the earthquake which is having a magnitude of 7.7 will release 31 by 31. 31 into 31, that is almost 1,000 times more energy that is released by 5.7 earthquake. Now this is a chart that is which shows the relationship between the magnitude and the annual average number, that is the occurrence of earthquake. As you see, the magnitude of 8 and higher, it is grouped under great earthquake, and it has annual average occurrence of only once. That means great or very severe earthquake will occur generally once in a year all over the world. Now, for magnitude 7.7 7 to 7.9, which is grouped under major earthquake, it shows an annual average number as 18. 6 to 6.9, which is grouped under strong, 120. 5 to 5.9, which is grouped under moderate earthquake, which has an occurrence rate of 800. And 4 to 4.9, which is grouped under light, it is showing an annual average number as 6,200. So you can see the relationship. The higher the magnitude or higher the severity of the earthquake, lower is the occurrence. Okay, lower is the occurrence. Now this is a post-earthquake picture taken after a post-earthquake picture at a survey done after Latur earthquake 1993. As you can see, this is a total devastation. There are like total demolition of devastation or severe damage to the building, and it is very obvious because as I can see that these buildings are made up of stone masonry. These are made up of stone masonry, that is stone which are piled one after another, and binding material like limestone or mud or mortar, these are used for binding purposes. So any kind of masonry, either brick or stone masonry, shows very much poor performance. This is an post Kashmir earthquake picture 2005 that occurred around 2005. Now intensity. Now intensity is a qualitative measure, and it gives the measure of the severity of the earthquake. Severity in the sense, severity in terms of damage done by the earthquake. Now the intensity scale are based upon three features like shaking, three features of shaking like perception by people and animals, performance of building, and changes to natural surroundings. Generally, the intensity are represented as Roman capital numerals, and it is an intensity scale is modified Mercalli intensity scale. So it ranges from a scale of 1 to 12. 1 means least perspective, that is severity is less, least, and 12 is most severe. Now, intensity can be represented in the form of isosysmal map. Now, what do we understand by isosysmal? Isosysmal are the imaginary lines that are joined in places of equal seismic activity. That means the severity, the damage over here is same to the damage over here. The damage over here is same to the damage over here, but the damage over here is different to the damage over here. Okay, so isosysmal map is a isosysmal line are the imaginary line that joins places with equal seismic intensity. Now, this is a typical isosysmal map after 2001 Bhuj earthquake. As you can see, the value is greater. The scale is greater. It is showing 10 intensity. 10 intensity near the epicenter, and it is showing 7 intensity far away from the epicenter, which is very obvious because maximum damage occurs around the places which are nearer to the epicenter. Now, this is another typical intensity isosysmal map of 1905 Kangra earthquake. Now, this is a map which shows the distribution of the large earthquake that happened in India and the adjoining places. All this, you can see the red dots and the stars are the past earthquake. It is the data of past earthquake. The stars actually it shows the importance of an earthquake. Maybe that earthquake is important because of its severity, because the damage it had caused, or the earthquake which was responsible for future revision of various standards and seismic codes and design criteria. Like you can see over here, it is showing a star in 2001 Bhuj earthquake, because 2001 Bhuj earthquake is a very prominent seismic activity occurred in prominent seismic activity occurred over India, because it was responsible for drastic change in seismic code, drastic change in construction practices, drastic change in design criteria and seismic codes. Another thing you can notice that most of the earthquake are concentrated over the plate boundary, the boundary of the tectonic plate or the plate boundary interaction. As you can see, this is the Himalayan collision range. This is the Himalayan collision range, and this is the range which is called the Indo-Burma range. It is called the Indo-Burma range or Indo-Burma subduction range. Now, this kind of earthquake, the earthquake always is frequented on this kind of plate boundary condition. And as you can see over India, northeast is very much seismically active region, because Northeast is placed at a very unique place. It is surrounded by different kind of plate boundary. Like over here, it is a collision plate boundary system, and over here it is a subduction plate boundary system, and over here both these plate boundary are joined by a small zone which is called the Assam syntaxis. So that's why this zone is always stressed due to the adjoining plate boundary interaction. Next comes seismic zones in India. Now India is divided into different zones based upon the seismic status or the susceptibility of a region. Now this is totally done according to based on past data earthquake. As you can see, this is the Indian seismic zone map in 1970, and this is the present Indian seismic zone, which is given in IS 1893 Part 1 2016. This is an earthquake code, earthquake Indian standard code. Now, as you can see, the seismic zone in the past map, it is zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. Zone 1 represents the least vulnerable places or least seismic activity, and zone 4 represents the most seismic activity. Okay, as you can see, as I have told you just now, that Northeast India is very much susceptible to earthquake, and that's why it is placed under zone 4. Now, after revision on 2004, this zone 1 and zone 2. See, the zone 1 is in white color and zone 2 is in purple color. This zone 1 and zone 2 is fused to form only zone 2. And now presently the Indian seismic zone map consists of 4 zones: zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. Now zone 2 is basically the Deccan Plateau, which has the least seismic activity, and zone 4 is like some part, like the major part is over in Northeast, which represents the highest seismic activity. So there are total 4 seismic zones. Now, depending upon the seismic zone in India, we consider the zone factor, which is called Z. Now, Z is nothing but the PGA value that I have discussed in the previous slide. That is peak ground acceleration. That is the acceleration, the maximum acceleration by which the earth shakes. The ground, sorry, not earth, the ground shakes. That is called peak ground acceleration. Now, for seismic zone 2, which is termed as low seismic activity, the PGA value is 0.1. For 3, which is termed as moderate seismic activity, it is 0.16. For 4 seismic zone, the seismic intensity is considered severe, which is 0.24 PGA value. And for seismic zone 5, which is considered seismic intensity very severe, that is 0.36 value. I request Bishoda sir to shoot the first poll.
Yes, I will do so. So I select presently India is divided into that one, na?
Yes.
So I've launched the poll. I request all members to vote quickly. We'll wait for 1 minute.
Okay, sir.
So we have reached 10 seconds with 21% votes. So we have reached 26 seconds. I request all members to vote fast. We have reached 42% votes only. Okay, so we have reached 50 seconds almost. We have reached 50% votes. I request all members to vote fast. So it is not going up. It is stuck to 50%, and we have reached 1 minute with 51% votes. I close it and I share the results. The results say that 47% goes for 4 zones, 31% goes for 6 zones, 16% goes for 5 zones, and 6% goes for 7 zones.
Okay.
Professor Poulomi.
Okay. The result will be
Hello, are you there?
yes, sir. Actually, yes. The result will be total seismic zone is 4. Total seismic zone is 4. That is zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, and zone 5. There are four seismic zone currently. The India has been divided.
So 47% people voted for that only. So I hide the results.
Okay.
You may continue.
Okay, thank you. Now, we have understood how earthquake occurs. We have also gone through how India is divided into different seismic zones. Now, let us understand how earthquake affect the structure, how the ground that shakes, it induces forces in the structure. Now, as you can see, this is a building, and this building is subjected to a ground shaking. The direction of the ground shaking is in this direction. Now, when the ground will shake, or when the ground will move in this direction, the base of the building will go along with the ground. It will move along with the ground. But due to Newton's first law of motion that we have studied, that the top portion of the building will try to remain in its original position, which we call it as inertia. Now, when the ground moves, even the building is thrown backward. As you can see, the building is thrown backward, and the roof experiences a force, which is called the inertia force. Now, we know that from second Newton's law of motion, that inertia force equal to mass into acceleration. Mass into acceleration. Now, what does it say? It says that higher the mass, higher will be the inertia force. So it says that if there are two buildings adjacent to each other at a particular location, the building which has higher weight will be more will have more inertia force induced in it as compared to the lighter structure, just because inertia force is equal to mass into acceleration. Now, the inertia force that is experienced by the roof, it is transferred to the ground via the column, causing the forces in the column. Now, as you can see, the ground is moving in this direction, and there is a relative movement. There's a relative movement, or there's a relative deformation of the column. This is a typical column. As you can see, the base of the column is moving with the ground, whereas the tip of the column is over here. Now, this is the relative displacement. Now, when the column is forced to bend, they develop internal forces. Larger the relative horizontal distance, larger the relative horizontal displacement between the top and the bottom of the column, more will be the internal force generated. Also, the internal force also depend upon the stiffness of the column. Stiffness means how bulky the column is, how bulky the column is, or how big the column is, how stiffer the column is, and which we call it as stiffness force. Now, the horizontal inertia forces that is developed at the roof of the building, it should get transferred safely to the ground for stability of the structure. And this we call it as load path, maintaining of load path. In any kind of structure, the load that comes to the structure should get safely transferred to the ground. And the load path that starts from the roof to the adjoining beam, to the adjoining columns, to the adjoining foundation, and then to the ground, it should not be interrupted with any kind of architectural defects, or architectural artifacts, or you can say any kind of problems. So the inertia force that is developed over the roof of the building are transferred to the wall or column, to the foundation, and finally to the soil system underneath. So it means what? It means that in order to safely transfer the inertia forces, each structural component, that is the floor slab, the walls, the column, and the foundation, should be designed safely so that they can transfer this inertia forces through them. Now, for seismicity, for seismicity or to encounter the effect of the seismicity of a building, walls and columns are the most critical elements in transferring the inertia forces. That traditionally, in traditional design practices or in traditional construction practices, always attention is given at the floor slabs or the roof slabs or the adjoining beam, and less care and less attention is given to walls. And column. Hence, they are poor in carrying horizontal earthquake forces along the direction of the thickness, and hence they are poorly designed and constructed. As you can see, this is a reinforced concrete building during collapse of a reinforced concrete building during 2001 Bhuj earthquake, where the column has collapsed fully. Now, what are the different effects of architectural features in building during earthquake? Now, after studying the damage done by the past data, it has been seen that too tall building, too long building, too large in plan, this kind of situation, this kind of plan should be avoided. Similarly, too complex building, the complex plan should always be divided into smaller, simpler plan. Like if I want to make a L-shaped building, I will make it in this way such that there is a separation joint. Because simple plan shape building do well during earthquake. Similarly, this kind of building, like said, this is called setback building. And this kind of building is very much, you can see, this is very much common over there. Like the ground story without any shear wall, it is totally the whole building, the whole mass of the building, the whole weight of the building is bearing on the column. So this kind of building, it instigates or it induces the mass irregularity or stiffness irregularity or torsional irregularity, which induces much amount of inertia forces in them. Now, any two building should be constructed in a way that there should be a minimum gap, there should be a proper enough gap between them, because when earthquake occurs, when earthquake happens, this building may vibrate and there may be possibility of pounding. Now, seismic design philosophy for a building. Now, what is the problem and how, and after studying that problem, how we have developed the seismic design philosophy. Now, severity of the ground shaking can be minor, moderate, and strong. That means earthquake can be minor, moderate, and strong. And as I've said it before, minor shaking or minor earthquake occurs frequently. Moderate shaking or moderate earthquake occurs occasionally, and strong earthquake or strong shaking occurs rarely. Like if I take the data over here, 800 earthquake of magnitude 5 to 5.9 occurs in the world, whereas magnitude range of 7 to 7.9 has only 18 as occurrence. The occurrence rate is only 80. So this reality gives rise to a question. The question is that, should we design and construct a building to resist a major earthquake that may come only once in 500 years, even though the life of the building itself may be 50 or 100 years? Yes, major earthquake, I'm talking about earthquake at a particular location. If I take a particular location, a major earthquake will occur rarely. It has a return period, like it can be 500 years. So is it required that suppose an earthquake which may come once in 500 years, is it required for us to construct that building according to that earthquake when the design life of the building is considered 50 or 100 years? Like when I say the design life of a building is 50 years, that means without any significant repairment, without any significant replacement of certain building components, the design life is considered according to our IS code is 50 years. And also it costs money, because making an earthquake resistant building requires huge strengthening, huge resources, huge amount of reinforcement. So of course it costs money. So therefore a conflict arises. Now this conflict this conflict, since it involves money, this conflict gives rise to two scenarios. The first scenario is that totally discarding the possibility of major earthquake. Totally discarding that, okay, it may come once in 500 years, but I won't consider it, and we will totally discard any possibility of occurrence. And hence, if we discard any possibility of occurrence, hence we will not consider the effect of earthquake on that building. Now this situation is very much impractical. Now what happens now it may happen that an earthquake which occurs once in 500 years, it may happen during the design life of that particular structure. So in that case, there will be huge damage, huge devastation, and it will be called as disaster. So first option, that is totally discarding the possibility, is an impractical approach. Now the second option, the second scenario is that considering the possibility of occurrence of earthquake as surety, okay, as surety, and making the building to be earthquake proof, such that under no major earthquake the building show any damage. So this is also impractical. Like I am making my building, I am just exhausting my money and making my building much more resistant to an earthquake, to a major earthquake, which may or may not come once in 500 years. So this is also not viable from economy point of view. And because of these two extreme cases, an approach has been considered, which takes the middle ground, and which takes the middle ground. Now, after considering the two extreme situations, the middle ground approach is that we will consider earthquake resistant building, but not earthquake proof building. We cannot make earthquake proof building. Making earthquake proof building is impractical from economic point of view. Like if I want to make a building which will show not a single scratch under major earthquake, in that case I have to construct a column. Having a size just like a size of a typical room, and that is not possible. So we don't go for earthquake proof building, but we go for earthquake resistant building. What do we understand by earthquake resistant building? That this kind of building will resist the effect of ground shaking, and we may allow damage. The building may allow damage, okay? The building may allow certain kind of damage, but that damage is in our hand. That is, we can control the severity of the damage, and at the same time, we can control the location of the damage. That means the damage should be within acceptable criteria. We are allowing the damage, but the damage should be such that it is under our acceptable criteria. And another approach is that under any condition, the building should not collapse, so that the safety of the people and content is assured in earthquake resistant building, and thereby a disaster is avoided. Now, this is the major objective of seismic codes throughout the world. Now, the main objective of performance of earthquake resistant design philosophy is that under minor shaking or minor earthquake, the building should be designed in a way such that the main component of the building, that is the beam, this horizontal member is called the beam, and this vertical member is called the column, it should not be damaged. However, some non-important part like wall, this brick masonry wall and non-important wall, it may show certain kind of damage, but that damage may be repairable. Now, the post-earthquake scenario is that the building will be fully operational after a short period of time, and the repair cost will be small. Now, under moderate earthquake or moderate shaking, the building should be designed in a way such that there can be some amount of damage in main component, that is the beam and the column, but that damage should be repairable. Now, the post-earthquake scenario is that the building should be operational once the repair and strengthening of the damaged main member is completed. And the last one is strong shaking. Now, under strong shaking, the building should be designed in a way such that the member suffers severe damage. Okay, we are allowing severe damage, but the main thing we have to maintain, that is, it should not collapse. The building may become dysfunctional for further use, but it will stand so that people can evacuate it and property recovered. We don't want this reality that we are seeing in this picture. We don't want this reality. We want that under major earthquake, the building may suffer severe damage. The building may suffer severe damage which cannot be repaired, but at least it should not collapse. At least it should give time for the people to get vacate, time to vacate or vacate with the properties or content. Now, as you can see, this damage is acceptable, but this kind of damage for minor and moderate shaking is not at all acceptable. But if I consider the major earthquake, it may be to some extent acceptable, but again we have to maintain the criteria that there should not be total collapse of the building. Now, since damage in building during earthquake cannot be avoided, we cannot avoid damage in building during earthquake, but we can control the amount and the location of the damage, and that is we call this acceptable damage, so that we can ensure the safety of the occupants and hence we can avoid a disaster. Now, this can be achieved by providing enough ductility. Now, what do we understand by ductility? Now, ductility is a property of a material that can undergo huge amount of deformation or elongation before fracture when it is subjected to any kind of load. Now, this graph, this force deformation graph is showing a typical ductile behavior, and this is showing a typical brittle behavior. Like take for example chalk. Now, chalk is a brittle material. Now, if we apply load or force over the chalk will break suddenly. It will cause sudden break, and that is the thing we need to avoid. We need to avoid sudden collapse or sudden breakage. We want progressive failure, and progressive failure can be only achieved by providing ductile material, because ductile material has the property to undergo huge amount of deformation. Hence, what will happen? It will provide enough time and warning. It will, by its deformation, it will give enough time and warning to the occupant to vacate the building. So that's why earthquake resistant building need to be built with ductility in them. Earthquake resistant design tries to predetermine the location where damage takes place and then to provide good detailing of that location to ensure ductile behavior of the structure. Detailing means providing ductile material, that is in case we are talking about steel reinforcement. This is just like an analogy of a chain. Like, see, this is a chain, and there is one ductile link at the bottom, at the middle, and rest are brittle link. Now, if I apply load in both the direction, what will happen? This ductile link, since it's ductile in nature, it will deform, it will elongate. That is, it is absorbing the forces. Now, this is necessary. This is necessary for a earthquake resistant design. Now, suppose take this scenario that there is no ductile link. There is no ductile link, only brittle link are there, and we are applying force in both the direction. What will happen? Without any warning, without any deformation, it will suddenly break, and that is very much avoided in case of earthquake resistant design. Now, these are some of the construction material. These are some of the construction material that are used in construction of a building, like masonry, like brick or stone masonry with cement mortar or mud mortar or lime mortar. Brick masonry is material. This kind of construction materials, it performs very poorly under earthquake. Concrete is generally concrete which is made up of cement, coarse aggregate, fine aggregate, and water. It is very much stronger than masonry under compressive load, but it shows very poor behavior in tension. Like, it is around the tension strength of concrete is around 10 to 15% of total compressive load. Now, reinforcing steel. Now, reinforcing steel. Now, this is very good in compression, and it is also very good in tension. So steel is a ductile material. Steel is a ductile material. It is a very good ductile material, and it is good in compression as well as it is good in tension. Now, this property of ductility enables the steel bar to undergo large elongation before breaking. Now, how to make building ductile for a good seismic performance? Now, we know that a building consists of horizontal and vertical member. These are the horizontal member. This is called a beam, and these are the vertical member. This is called the column. Now, the seismic inertia forces are generated at the floor level. Okay, these are generated at the floor level as I have shown in the previous slide. And that seismic inertia forces are transferred to the ground from called beam to column or wall, and then to the foundation, and then to the footing. So the correct building component needs to be ductile. It needs to be act as a weak link. So if we make column as a weak link, and if column fails under earthquake, the overall stability of the structure will be compromised. So that's why we will never go for column as a weak link. We will always go for beam as a weak link, because if beam fails, that will be a localized failure. That will have a localized effect. The failure of a column affects the overall stability of the building, but the failure of beam causes the localized effect. And that's why we go for strong column, weak beam design method. What do you understand by strong column and weak beam? We are making the column stronger as compared to beam, such that under earthquake, the column is not compromised, because the column ensures the overall stability of the structure. Now, as you can see, we will go for strong column and weak beam design philosophy. We won't go for weak column and strong beam philosophy, because when earthquake hits, what will happen? The column will get compromised, and the overall stability of the structure will be compromised. Therefore, it is better to make beam to be ductile weak link than column. This method of designing of RC building is called strong column, weak beam design methods. Now, these are some of the different design seismic code that is required as per Indian standard. IS 456-2000, plain and reinforced concrete code of practice. IS 1893-2016, criteria for earthquake resistant design of structure code of practice. And accordingly, it is having IS 13920-2016, ductile detailing of reinforced concrete structure subjected to seismic forces. So these two are the major code that is used for earthquake resistant design. So this presentation was a general overview of the design philosophies. I have deliberately not delved into the technicalities or the criteria as per the given IS codes. These are the references. Thank you. And I request Vishwadhar sir to shoot the last poll.
Yes, I will do that. And I have done that. So I'll request all members to vote. Again, we will wait for 1 minute.
Okay.
So the question is, earthquake resistant design building should exhibit dash performance. Ductile, brittle, both of the above, none of the above. So we are in the 28th second. We have received 42% votes. I request all members to vote. We will wait for 1 minute. We have reached 43 seconds with 47% votes till now. We are almost there, and we have reached 50% votes again. So we have reached 1 minute. I close it and I will share the result. This time also we received 51% votes. And this is the result, saying 47% has gone for ductile performance and 45% says both of the above. Brittle says 5%, none of the above says 4%.
Okay. The result will be ductile performance. The result will be ductile performance.
So that is with 47% maximum votes also.
Yes.
Okay. So I hide the results, and what I will do is I will read out the questions. I will just read out the questions. Allow me a minute. Okay. So I have reached the questions. First question was from Professor Ankur Vishwas. In the seismic zone in India, what is microzoned city? And how come Sundarban area come under zone 4, even though I couldn't see much of prior occurrence of earthquake in that area?
Okay, thank you. It's a nice question. Microzone city, let us go into the, yes. Microzone city means these are the city where hazard analysis, that is customized hazard analysis has been done. You can say that here the risk analysis of a particular risk analysis due to seismicity or hazard analysis of the seismicity is done in much detail. So that is called microzone city. Like right now, Assam, Guwahati is also undergoing to be microzone city, and presently Jaipur city is also going for microzonation. This is called actually microzonation, seismic microzonation. Jaipur city is the upcoming, like within 3 to 5 years, the total seismic microzonation will be done. You can say that it is in-depth analysis of the seismicity or vulnerability of a city. It is taken in more localized form. And the second question, what is the second question, sir? So second part of the question, sir.
Okay, I'm coming to it. Sorry. How come Sundarban areas come under zone 4, even though I couldn't see much of prior occurrence of earthquake in the area?
Okay, actually, sir, this is due to the faulting structure. It is after going through various geophysical exploration and various kind of tectonic plate study. It has been seen that in future there is a possibility of earthquake. Maybe it does. It didn't happen. It didn't happen in the past.
Okay. Dr. Shubroto Chattopadhyay asks, what are the signals that an earthquake is imminent?
See, this is a very debatable topic. It is called the earthquake precursor. We see that we tell various kind of things like animal or animal signals or various kind of like groundwater flow or any kind of groundwater rising of groundwater. This kind of things are there, but this is very debatable. It still didn't have any kind of scientific explanation, and so it is actually in a technical term, it is called precursor, earthquake precursor. So this is not actually scientifically proven yet.
Okay. So Professor Ankur Biswas says overall the presentation was excellent, as almost all of the curiosities in the area as novice are addressed. Okay, so thank you, Professor Ankur Biswas. And Professor Pritha Noshkar also says the same thing. Excellent presentation, very clear. Professor Jyotirmoy Haloi comes up with 2 comments, I believe. In Bhuj earthquake, mainly failure occurred by liquefaction. We try to minimize the damage and save life. That is the main philosophy of earthquake resistant structure. Okay.
Yes.
Professor, yes. Any comments on that?
No, it's okay. Yes, she's liquefaction is actually it's a part of a it's a part of a geotechnical. So I didn't cover actually over here. I didn't go to in depth.
Yes. Professor Shobhik Chattopadhyay asks, is there any other option other than brick walls for safety from earthquakes?
No, brick wall. The thing is that The thing is that when I have said masonry structure, I have said that without any reinforcement, like the typical building that we reside, it consists of brick masonry as well as beams and columns. Now, beams and columns are reinforcement. When I have said that masonry structure which shows poor performance, it is that kind of housing where it doesn't have any kind of reinforcement within them. The total building is made up of only brick masonry. There is no beam and column, just a brick masonry. Because when beam and column comes into the picture, then only reinforcement or any further detailing also comes into the picture. So in that case, replacing brick wall is not that, it is not the criteria. Fine.
Okay. So I'm trying to find the other questions are mainly coming through comments. Professor Shoykot Chakraborty also has written the same thing, a very nice presentation. Professor Somnath Hajra says that it was explained in a lucid way. Request to share the presentation. Professor Shubhashish Rana, thank you for nice presentation. Okay, fine. So I'm mainly finding the question. So there is one question from Professor Avijit Kaur-Gupta. Okay, I believe Professor Kaur-Gupta, you got your answer. Still, I read out the question. Is there any device to detect the earthquake before it occurs, or how red zone areas are to be taken off? So, or taken care of? Yes. So that question's answer, I believe we have got. Anything more to add?
No, sir, actually, no, sir. We cannot just predict an earthquake. That is the thing.
Okay. Okay, are there any two plates likely to collide in near future? Over the years, what does the trend show? Is earthquake becoming more common? That is what is asked by Professor Saurav Banerjee.
See, first of all, the approach that we take, that earthquake is a natural calamity. Earthquake is a something that it is occurring, it is common, it is the wrong way to approach, because earthquake is a natural phenomena. In order to form the earth crust, in order to form the lithosphere, earthquake is very much necessary. So earthquake doesn't kill human beings. Actually, the structure actually kill human beings. So as you have said that plate boundary interaction, it cannot be, it never be avoided, because as I've told you, there is a continuous circulation of the earth mass, and since there is a continuous circulation of the earth mass, there will be always plate interaction, because ultimately the plate boundary interaction is responsible for your formation of sea, formation of ocean, formation of different lithological features. So in that way, we cannot say that it is becoming common. It is only part of the history of the earth.
Okay, so another question from Professor Somnath Hajra. It is a comment and he wants your comment also. Introduction of shear wall can be a possible solution to high-rise building to earthquake. Your comment on that?
Yes, obviously. I mean, shear wall is also added in any kind of building also, like if we see lift. Generally, in case of lift, since lift is constructed in a hollow case, just like a hollow case in a building. So the wall around that lift, it is made up of shear wall. So in that case, in high-rise building, many other technicalities comes, many other different high technology comes, like base isolation and many other things. So shear wall is not only associated with earthquake resistant structure, it is also associated in simple RCC structure as well. The wall that we see in the lift, it is nothing but shear wall. That is the wall which is having reinforcement.
Okay, so here comes a question from Professor Pathik Dev Mollik. Maybe he's the most senior professor in civil engineering in the group with huge experience in the industry. So his question is, in urban areas, we see that in buildings, more free columns for garage space with no infills, which lead to soft story effect due to variable stiffness. This causes huge damages that you also have shown in one slide. Can it be
Yes,
avoided? Can it be avoided? Moreover, in order to save space, the second part of the question, let me read out. Moreover, in order to save space in floor, the beam column detailing is badly compromised as bars are joggled at beam column junction. Do you suggest some remedy?
Like for the first part of the question is that, yes, I have shown you the soft story or weak story mechanism. So in that case, we can go for at least shear wall in between. We can go for shear wall in between, because this kind of structure is very much avoided. We cannot make a structure like in this way, like we are without any infill wall. That is not that actually causes poor performance, seismic performance. So that's why we can go for shear wall. We can go for shear wall in between, like in not around the ground floor, but it between at proper places, so that the load is properly transmitted to the ground. And also it can resist the base shear. It can also resist the shear force that occurs during the earthquake. And so can you repeat the second part of the question? I didn't get it.
Okay, sure. He says, in order to save space in floor, like in the floor, if somebody wants to save space, the beam column detailing is badly compromised as bars are juggled due to beam column junction. Do you suggest some remedy? That is, he says that the beam column junction, at the beam column junction, the bars are often juggled. That compromises the beam column detailing, and that is done to save the space in floor, to save floor space. So here he is requesting some remedy, if you have any.
Remedy in this case we have to go for we have to go for you can say that we have to go for a proper design. Actually, like this kind of things needs to be avoided, and any other remedy is not actually coming to my mind right now. But obviously,
Yes,
what
so,
you have told, I've understood.
According to you, the answer is straightforward. The answer is it should not be compromised. As Sir
Yes,
says
it
that it
should
is
not.
badly compromised,
Yes.
it is being badly compromised. So according to you, it should not be compromised, because it is an important thing as far as the structural engineering is concerned.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
So so Professor Shyam Sundar Kaur, is it a meaningful comment? He says, I have seen movement of rats before night of Latur earthquake. Okay, not sure. Is this a meaningful comment?
As I've said, there is no scientific explanation still attached, so I should not comment on this.
Okay, let's go with it. Let's go with it. Absolutely. Earthquakes are occurring every second as plates are moving continuously. The magnitudes are very less. That's why we don't recognize. Says the comment is made by Professor Jyotirmoy Haloi again.
Yes.
Okay. Professor Rahul Kumar. What will be the effect on bunkers if earthquake occurs of magnitude 8 to 9, greater than 8 to 9?
Bunkers, there can be possibility of liquefaction of ground. There can be possibility of liquefaction of ground if we consider the bunker. And also it will have a same effect, just like in case of a building. Like it may if it is not designed in according to the criteria, like there is one IS code which deals with the design criteria of bunker and silos, and if it doesn't follow the design criteria, that the same cases it will show, just like it has been seen in residential buildings or any kind of commercial buildings.
Right. Professor Tonoy Pramanik, he is again a senior professor, comes out with a question. Is it true that before earthquake hits any area, the concentration of argon and helium gas increases in that area? Can it be used to detect earthquake? So once again, we are going to the same line, and she actually tried to avoid questions of this order, because according to her, if I am not wrong, madam, then your point is that it is not scientific. But still, do you have any comment?
Actually, I don't have any comment, because I haven't I haven't heard about these two, like helium. So
Okay.
sorry, I can't comment on this one.
Okay, thank you. Last question from Professor Kunjam Kumar. He asks, which software is used to analyze seismic performance of high-rise buildings?
Analyze. There are many softwares. Like if I go for commercial softwares, it can be SAP 2000, ETABS. Now, if I go for software which is focused on research, that will be OpenSeas or Abacus. Now, recently, in case of research papers and all, OpenSeas are preferred compared to SAP, because SAP is more commercialized. It is used in case in industry, but OpenSeas, since it is developed by Pioneer Earthquake Institute, so it is used for research purposes. So OpenSeas and Abacus, it's a good choice.
Okay, good. So it was really a nice presentation, and you seem to be quite an expert in this topic, Professor Poulomi. So thank you. I'm sure that you will do further research on this. Thanks to all IEM and UEM family members. Thank you, Professor Poulomi. And okay, so we'll make again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.